Have you ever wondered why incredibly successful companies, the giants of their industries, can just suddenly fail? One day they seem completely untouchable, and the next they're gone. Well, the answer often comes down to something called emerging risks. These are the hidden threats that can quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, dismantle even the most powerful players. So today, we're going to break down a framework for understanding and hopefully navigating these exact risks. Okay, check out this number because it should really make you stop and think. Of the original Fortune 500 companies from way back in 1955, a staggering 86% of them are gone. Yep, they've been bought out, they've gone bankrupt, or they just faded away. Why? Because they simply failed to adapt to a changing world. And this isn't some ancient history lesson. It's happening all the time. You can really see the two paths a company can take right here. On one side, you've got the fallen giants. Toys R Us completely dismissed e-commerce. IBM, for a time, totally missed the software revolution. And on the other side, you have the survivors. Think about Western Union pivoting from telegrams to money transfers, or National Geographic transforming from a print magazine into a multimedia powerhouse. The story couldn't be clearer. Adapt or disappear. So, let's start by digging into this core problem. Even the biggest, most successful companies out there are shockingly vulnerable to sudden, unexpected changes in the market.
Okay, so let's get on the same page and define what we're actually talking about here. What exactly is an emerging risk?
At its heart, an emerging risk is some future threat that, if it really happens, could completely torpedo a company's plans. We're talking about things like the massive impact of AI, a huge cybersecurity breach, or the real financial fallout from climate change. These aren't just your everyday business problems. These are potential company enders.
I love this analogy because it's just perfect. An emerging risk is exactly like living next to a dormant volcano. You know it could erupt, you just have absolutely no idea when. It's that mix of a known threat with an unknown timeline that makes it so hard to plan for. So how do companies try to protect themselves financially? Well, they have two main safety nets. You've got liquidity, which is all about the short term. It's the cash you have on hand to pay this month's bills. But then there's capital. That's the long-term cushion, the deep savings account meant to absorb a huge, unexpected hit, like that volcano erupting.
All right, let's pivot and look at the major threats we're facing in today's world. And these aren't just isolated problems for one company. These are massive global forces that can impact literally everyone. I mean, just look at this list for a second. A central bank getting interest rates wrong, political instability breaking out, new conflicts, trade wars. These are enormous, complicated risks. You can't just plug these into a simple spreadsheet and hope for the best. And that brings us to a really crucial distinction. You have systemic risks, like the ones we just saw, that affect the entire market. There's no hiding from them. But then you have idiosyncratic risks, which are specific to one single company. Think bad management or a flawed product. You can protect yourself from those. But systemic risk? Nope, that's a wave that hits every boat. Okay, now this is where things get really fascinating. We've been talking about all these external threats, volcanoes, central banks, you name it. But what if the biggest risks aren't out there at all? What if they're actually inside our own heads? It's a huge question, right? Because it forces us to face a pretty tough reality. A lot of the time, the real reason for a catastrophic failure isn't a market crash or a new competitor. It's our own psychology. It's our mental shortcuts and our blind spots. The official name for this is cognitive bias. It's basically when our brains take these little mental shortcuts, relying on incomplete info or just gut feelings. And that can lead us to make decisions that feel totally logical to us, but are actually, well, deeply flawed. A classic one is confirmation bias. You've probably seen this in action. It's our tendency to only listen to stuff that agrees with what we already believe. So if a CEO is convinced their new strategy is a work of genius, they might unconsciously ignore all the early data that's screaming, "This is a disaster!" Then there's anchoring. Think about how powerful first impressions are. That's kind of what this is. We get anchored to the very first piece of information we hear on a topic, and we just have a really hard time adjusting our thinking, even when much better information comes along later. And loss aversion, oh, this one is powerful. Psychologically, the pain of losing $100 feels way worse than the joy of gaining $100.
This can make leaders super cautious, causing them to hang on to failing projects for far too long, just hoping to avoid admitting a loss. And believe me, the list just keeps going. There's overconfidence, the planning fallacy, where we always think things will take less time than they do, and, of course, the instinct to just follow the crowd. Each one is a subtle little mental trap that can trick us, even when we think we're being perfectly rational. So, after all those threats, both outside and inside our heads, what's the solution? What's the game plan? How does an organization actually build the resilience it needs to survive all this? This is maybe the most important takeaway of all. You cannot just rely on the numbers. A spreadsheet can't predict a geopolitical crisis, and it sure can't account for a CEO's confirmation bias. A truly strong strategy has to combine the hard data with what we call qualitative analysis. That's human judgment, critical thinking, and a broad sense of awareness. And here's a really practical 4-step process to do just that. It starts with self-awareness, knowing your own biases. Then, situational awareness, seeing the world as it is, not how you want it to be. From there, you have to actively look for different perspectives. And finally, you have to empower a devil's advocate, literally, someone whose job it is to challenge the popular opinion and stop everyone from thinking the same way. Now, there's actually a formal framework that brings all of this together. It's called Enterprise Risk Management, or ERM, and it's a holistic, big-picture approach that looks at the entire portfolio of risks, systemic, internal, behavioral, to understand how they all connect and affect the whole organization. This quote really gets to the heart of it. Real resilience can't just live in the risk department. It demands a company-wide culture where everybody, across every team, is part of the solution. It's about breaking down those internal walls to build one unified, flexible defense against whatever is coming next. Which leaves us with one last really big question to think about. Just like that volcano, the next major disruptive risk is already out there, quietly building up pressure. The real challenge isn't just preparing for the risks we could already see, but developing the awareness and, frankly, the humility to spot the one that everyone else is completely overlooking.